Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Young Gun Show. And today I'm joined with my partner in crime, Jackson, and very special guest, Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. If you want anything about USC, go to Trojans Wire. That's where it's at. Matt does incredible work there. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year's.
Hey, Matt.
So, what were the expectations going into the season? Lincoln Riley's first season, a lot of new players coming in. Obviously, they had to come in because it was a disappointing last season with Clay Helton. So, what were the expectations going in?
Well, I'm sure you had your own expectations for what USC was going to be. And I think that the prevailing nationwide expectations, so just looking at the whole country, all publications, all analysts, all talking heads, I think it was 9-3. I think that was the general national consensus. I mean, some people thought 10-2, maybe a few people thought 11-1, but a lot of people thought 9-3, and there were plenty of people who thought 8-4 because you just had so much wreckage to clear out from the Clay Helton reign of error at USC, and there was just so much to fix in 1 year. And like USC gave up 62 points to UCLA and Dorian Thompson-Robinson a year ago. And so, like, how do you just excavate? How do you dig out from that very big deficit? And you're just in 1 year, wow, that's really asking a lot. So I think that was the national expectation. But, I think one thing that was overlooked from the start is that Caleb Williams is just a luminous talent. And of course, he didn't have a full season at Oklahoma. He wasn't the day one starter last season. Spencer Rattler was for the Sooners. And so, Caleb Williams kind of snuck up on people to a certain extent. I mean, people knew he was talented, but I think there was an expectation nationally that, even though Lincoln Riley has Caleb Williams, it's still going to take some time for everything to come together because you have the offensive line and you're trying to change a culture and you're trying to build depth. And I think there was skepticism about these surrounding pieces and not enough focus was given to, whoa, like this guy has serious upside. And even though he didn't play a full 12-game season at Oklahoma, he did become a starter. He did learn the ropes there. He was able to stay with Lincoln Riley at USC. That's the other thing. Like, he transferred programs, but he stayed with the same head coach. And that's really important. And if you look at other stories from the Pac-12, Will and Jackson, this season, Bo Nix succeeded partly because he's a good quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
He exceeded my expectations. I was a traumatized skeptic having seen him play at Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I discounted about Bo Nix, and I should have put more value into this, is that Kenny Dillingham, his offensive coordinator at Oregon, he worked with him at Auburn. Mm-hmm. So he was coming with him. They were reuniting it at Oregon. So having that continuity really helped Bo Nix. Like, I don't think Bo Nix would have had the year he had if Dillingham wasn't there with him, because those two had a rapport. And so Lincoln Riley, to bring this back to USC, Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams had a rapport. So this was year 2 of Caleb Williams within Lincoln Riley's offense. If Caleb Williams is playing for someone other than Lincoln Riley this year, he doesn't win the Heisman Trophy. And I think that applies to whether he was at USC or Oklahoma. So it's not specific to a school. It's having Lincoln Riley to learn from, because you can hate Lincoln Riley all you want. That's fine. I don't care. I don't mind if you think Lincoln Riley's a fraud or he's just throwing money at athletes at USC. I really don't mind. But if just in terms of raw, cold football analysis, we know that Lincoln Riley is at the collegiate level. He's the quarterback whisperer. Hold on, my cat needs to go through a door here. There we go. All right. So Lincoln Riley is the quarterback whisperer. The dude has coached 3 Heisman winners before turning 40 years old. And that's ridiculous.
That's big.
And he's coached 4 top 2 Heisman vote getters when you realize that Jalen Hurts was number 2 to Joe Burrow in 2019. And he's not even 40. He's coached several top 4 Heisman finishers when you also include D.D. Westbrook. He was a top 4 Heisman finisher at Oklahoma when Riley was offensive coordinator, hadn't taken over the program in full. But like, Lincoln Riley coaches Heisman quarterbacks. That's what he does. He's done that consistently from Baker to Kyler, and now Caleb Williams. So just having that relationship, having year two together as a pair, that was always discounted in terms of USC being able to immediately, instantly, in year one, get back to being a 10, 11 win team. And that's the thing that I, was looking at the whole time. I knew that there was the lack of depth on defense, the lack of depth on the offensive line, and that if there were too many injuries, that would be a problem. And so Utah was good enough and tough enough, physical enough to expose USC's lack of depth on the offensive line. When Andrew Voorhees, USC's best offensive line prospect, he's probably going to be a first-round selection, maybe the start of the second round, but he's going to be a top 50 pick for sure. When he went out, Utah was able to take advantage. Now, Cal wouldn't take advantage. Arizona wouldn't take advantage. Utah was good enough, but the rest of the Pac-12 was not able to take advantage of it. And so Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley together, they just raised the bar instantly so high for the USC offense that was going to overcome the depth, the lack of defense, the lack of physicality, and a lot of people undervalued that. So I think that's really how people set a certain bar for expectations at USC this season, and I think set the bar a little bit too low, just realizing how dynamic Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams are as a combination, and that is exactly what lifted USC to 11 wins.
Mm-hmm. So the defense of USC has been a big weakness, especially against Utah in both matchups. The 82nd in scoring defense, points per game allowed, 114th in passing yards allowed per game, 63rd in rushing yards allowed per game, and 102nd in total yards allowed per game. And I believe they're 40th in the red zone defense. How will it be a problem against Tulane in the Cotton Bowl? How much of a problem is it going to be?
It's going to be a very big problem. And talking to people who follow Tulane and just talking to other people who follow the Group of Five and the AAC more generally, the comparison has been made between this Tulane team in 2022 to Mike Norvell's 2019 Memphis team. And that team won the Group of Five, went to the Cotton Bowl, lost to Penn State in the Cotton Bowl 53-39. I think we're looking at another 53-39 type game. Tulane is going to get its points. Tulane is going to score against USC. And it's just a matter of, can the offense get out of its way? Can Caleb Williams, be healthy enough after his hamstring injury in the Pac-12 championship game? Can he score 45, 49, 52 points? He's probably going to need it, much like the UCLA game. That was a 48-45 game. USC was playing shootouts pretty much the whole second half of the season, 45-37 against Arizona, 41-35 against Cal. So that's probably the kind of game we're going to have. USC's defensive flaws, they're not going to be fixed overnight. And 4 weeks of preparation for the Cotton Bowl, that's not going to do it. USC does not have the dudes, and Tulane has some really terrific skill players such as Tyjae Spears. He is a tackle busting running back. That's his identity. That is kryptonite for USC's defense. So Tulane's going to get its share of points. It's just all about USC being able to score enough to offset it. So that's going to be a typical USC storyline, a typical USC game for this season. And so, in terms of let's shift the focus to Alex Grinch, because I'm sure you want some talk about Alex Grinch.
Mr. Grinch.
Absolutely. So I'm on record as saying two things. One, that if Jim Leonard, was available, if he was willing to listen, that USC should make a run at him. But I also don't think Alex Grinch should be fired, because we went into year one knowing that this defense did not have the personnel. It did not have the resources that was going to make it into a really good group. So Alex Grinch had a 2-year plan, basically a 2-year project to build this defense up to a higher level. Year one was not going to hit the target. We knew that going in. So the idea that, if anyone says, well, Alex Grinch failed to meet expectations this year, no. he actually met expectations, might have even slightly exceeded them when you realize that USC won the Oregon State game completely because of its defense. Holding Oregon State to 14 points, getting 4 interceptions. Like, the defense won that game, and that's one more game than we expected USC's defense to win this year. So by that measurement and a few other measurements, USC's defense was not, completely awful. I mean, it was bad, but it wasn't rock bottom. Rock bottom was last year. Rock bottom was allowing 62.
And you lost to Oregon State for the first time since the early
in the Coliseum for the first
in the
time.
Coliseum, yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so for anyone who's saying, oh, this is the worst USC defense ever, hey, were you paying attention last year? Like,
I stayed up till 1 a.m. watching that.
Yeah, that's what rock bottom looked like. That was last year. So Alex Grinch, by comparison, like, he was better. So, like, year 1 is fine. But now in year 2, you can't have that series of results again. So in 2023, like, even the Alex Grinch apologists, the people who will be the first in line to defend him, they will say, you know what, this has to be a lot better in year 2. And if it's not, then you're getting your walking papers. And then Lincoln Riley has to demand more from his defensive coordinator. I mean, it's just that simple. He had Mike Stoops in 2017 and early 2018. And, he just got embarrassed by Texas. He had to cut the rope. And he had to go somewhere else, so he chose Alex Grinch. And Alex Grinch at Oklahoma, what was he asked to do at the start? He was asked to take an absolute rock bottom defense, at the very floor, and just try and make it moderately better. That's what he was asked to do in year 1 here at USC. So that is the complication with Alex Grinch, right? He is asked to take absolutely awful defenses and just make them a little bit less awful. So by that standard, he's okay. But you certainly wouldn't call him an elite defensive coordinator because, well, he doesn't create, elite defenses. He doesn't create Alabama 2011. He doesn't create Nebraska 1995. He doesn't create these high-end defenses. So, on one hand, he's not asked to do much. But on the other hand, well, if you're going to earn elite status in college football, you have to do something pretty special. And, of course, Alex Grinch hasn't done anything special in his career. So he lives in that in-between existence because he's just asked to put out fires. He's not asked to create something special. He's just asked to do damage control. Well, see, at USC, in year 1, that's fine. But in year 2, year 3, as you go into the Big Ten, it's not going to be enough to just ask Alex Grinch to do damage control. You actually need to do something positive. You actually need to do something substantial. And so Alex Grinch's reputation, his legacy, his identity as a defensive coordinator, it's been putting out fires, but that has to change. That now has to become something very different, something a whole lot better. And 2023 is going to be a season in which we really learn a lot about Alex Grinch, especially with Mason Cobb, the excellent linebacker coming over in the transfer portal. That is part of the depth, part of the talent upgrade. And with more bodies and better players in the fold, the expectations are certainly going to rise for Alex Grinch.
So how important was escaping in Corvallis to get USC to where they needed to get? Like, how important was it?
I think it was absolutely essential. Keep in mind that was the first really tough road test of the season. USC played a road game in week 2 at Stanford, but the place was a mausoleum. And Stanford was not very good this year. But Oregon State, like we can see now, Oregon State won 10 games this year. The Beavers are, legitimately tough. I mean, they have all the pieces on their roster except one quarterback. And USC was able to expose that limitation. But getting through that game, because it was early in the season and, in late September, that was a week 4 game. Once USC got past that, the only other really big road hurdle on the schedule was the Utah game. But in November, USC did not have to leave Los Angeles at all. 3 home games, and then the one quote-unquote road game was UCLA, the battle for Los Angeles, basically a neutral site game. So getting past that Oregon State game, that was the really big road hurdle. If you win that Oregon State game, then you can lose to Utah and still make the Pac-12 championship game, which is exactly how it played out. But if you lose that Oregon State game, then you have to win that Utah road game to make the Pac-12 championship game. So that's why that Oregon State game was always such a key hinge point moment for USC's season. And, winning that game really was the difference between 11-2 and the 9-3 record that a lot of people were projecting for the Trojans before the season began.
Right. And Caleb Williams, as we mentioned, we don't know if he's going to be playing or not due to the hamstring injury. Jordan Addison is out due to opt-out. And two of the O-linemen, Andrew Voorhees and Brett Nelson, is out. So, and Tulane does not have any injuries or opt-outs whatsoever, or transfers, so to speak. How much will it affect USC going into the Cotton Bowl?
Yeah, so not having Brett Nealon at center, like that is a significant loss, as well as Voorhees for USC. And so you're going to have, and these are the new names you're going to have to learn on Monday in the Cotton Bowl: Gino Quinones and Mason Murphy. Quinones is going to be at left guard, and Mason Murphy is going to be at right tackle. Those are the two new guys who are going to be thrown into the fire. Now, they've played before this season. Quinones played in week 5 against Arizona State. Murphy played multiple games late in the season. He played against Arizona. He played against Cal. So, neither of those guys have played against, elite competition, or at least they didn't play well against elite competition. Mason Murphy got smoked by Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. Like, that was the consequence of Voorhees not being there. So in many ways, and I would definitely think that as we look at the Cotton Bowl here, the keys to the game, number one key by far is how USC's retooled offensive line fares against Tulane's pass rush. I think that's the whole ball game. If USC can keep Caleb Williams clean, and if Caleb, who is expected to play, but we don't know how mobile he's going to be. We don't know how much agility he's going to have coming off his injury. But if Caleb Williams can, reasonably move around in the pocket, and USC can keep Caleb Williams clean, Trojans should be fine. Because even without Jordan Addison, like, you have Mario Williams, you have Taj Washington, you have Michael Jackson, you have Kyle Ford. I mean, wide receiver is USC's deepest position. And let's keep in mind that Addison got injured against Utah, so he did not play against Arizona or Cal. Trojans still put up over 40 points. Like, they were fine. Like, they have the dudes at wide receiver. That is not a place where this roster is thin. It's thin in a lot of other position groups, but not at wide receiver. So as long as Caleb Williams gets the time to throw down the field, pick his targets, Trojans should be okay. But if Gino Quinones and Mason Murphy struggle in their respective roles along that offensive line, and Tulane can hit Caleb Williams and get a few sacks, given all of USC's defensive problems, that really reduces USC's margin for error. So, like, that's the whole ballgame. Like, Utah was able to overpower USC's undermanned offensive line, but Utah, sets a really high bar in terms of rugged physical play, in terms of having quality depth up front. Utah was missing 2 of its best defensive linemen for that Pac-12 championship game, and the backups were fine. The backups were able to roast Mason Murphy and USC's backup offensive linemen. But does Tulane have that same capacity in terms of pass rush? And, I watched the Military Bowl earlier this week, UCF versus Duke. Duke man-balled UCF. Like, Duke physically dominated UCF. Tulane split with UCF during the season, lost in the regular season, then won the rematch in the AAC championship game. And I'm thinking, well, if Tulane could not handle UCF more convincingly than Duke did, that's a pretty good sign for USC. That tells me that in terms of the competition that Tulane faced in the AAC, and Tulane won the conference, and it's obviously an enormous achievement for Willie Fritz in that program. But just in terms of the competition that you're looking at, if Duke could physically handle UCF and Tulane, split with UCF during the season, I think that tells me that USC's ceiling is still a lot higher. And that goes to another really key point about this game. And that is that, will USC care about this game? Will USC treat it as a big deal? Hey, we're back in a New Year's Six game for the first time in several years. This is a real opportunity. Or It's the Cotton Bowl. It's in the Monday morning against Tulane. What a dumpy bowl. And, so we don't know what the attitude's going to be. But if you want an indicator on that front, well, first off, Caleb Williams wants to play in this game. So like he's wanting to go after it. Whether his body will cooperate, separate question. But like he wants to play this game. And the other Trojan who wants to play this game and is expected to play is Tuli Tuipulotu, USC's best defensive lineman. So if your best offensive player and your best defensive player, two of your team leaders, both really want to play in a game where, if they opted out, no one would be shocked and no one would be too disappointed about their decision, especially with Caleb wanting to stay healthy, Tuli Tuipulotu preparing for the NFL draft. Now, he hasn't made a decision as we talk right now on Friday afternoon, but he is expected to go to the NFL draft for this year. The fact that Caleb and Tuli want to play under these circumstances, that should tell you that like they're invested in this game. And if they're invested in this game, that is an indicator that the USC team as a whole is invested in this game. So like no guarantees. USC might just drift through this game and not care. But I would bet that USC is going to treat this game with the level of passion and the level of intensity that it deserves. And if USC cares, that is one really big ingredient for a Trojan victory over Tulane.
So how big were the newcomers this year with Mario Williams, Travis Dye? Obviously, we know Jordan Addison's opting out. And Damani Jackson, of course, the freshman. Like how much different do you think this season would have been if they didn't have those newcomers?
Well, with Damani Jackson,
too,
yeah, he was injured a lot, but in the time that he was there, the USC defense really fit together. People who follow USC will tell you, and I think you already seem to sense it, that when Damani Jackson was healthy and on the field and was able to play for a brief period of time, everyone was in the proper role. Everyone fit together very comfortably within that defense, within Alex Grinch's scheme. And so not having him healthy was a real loss. Even though Damani Jackson was just a freshman, he made everyone better on that defense. So that was notable, and that did stand out for USC this season. And I think the larger point to make about all the newcomers, or at least all the newcomers who did especially well, such as Mario Williams, as an example, also Jordan Addison, they took the pressure off the Clay Helton holdovers who were invited back to the roster. Obviously, Lincoln Riley used the transfer portal a lot. There was a ton of roster turnover. So the guys who stayed on the roster, well, that was a real vote of confidence from Lincoln Riley. Like, hey, you're good enough to stay with us. But having those transfers, those new incoming transfers, they were able to both set an example on the practice field and in the locker room, but also produce on the field in ways that all the Clay Helton players who are returning for this year, they realized, I don't have to be the hero. I don't have to do it all myself. I have help. I have other people with me, who are going to create opportunities for me. And the other thing that's part of this mixture is that Lincoln Riley insists, if you are a skill position player, you need to block for your teammates. You need to help out with pass protection. You need to do the grunt work as well as catching the ball, getting carries, getting touches. And so that created a mindset where everyone on the USC roster chipped in all the different areas. That's why you had, such good pass protection for Caleb Williams for most of the season. That's why you had, good run pass mixture, being able to hit opponents from different angles. Like, it's not just about having guys who catch well and having guys who run well. They bought into everything about the offense and taking care of all their roles and responsibilities on each play, including and especially the plays in which they did not get the ball. It was a teammate getting the ball. So having these incoming transfers, it created a reality in which people didn't have to get all the credit themselves, but they also didn't have to do everything themselves. It was enough to just block for a teammate. It was enough to set up a teammate's opportunity. In terms of the win over UCLA, for example, like Jordan Addison, he had 11 catches for 178 yards, but Caleb Williams threw for over 400 yards in that game. So that was a perfect example of Addison kind of setting an example, but also opening up the field for the number 2, number 3 wide receivers, and no one guy had to do it himself. I mean, Addison was great in that game, but he accounted for just like 40% of USC's overall passing yards, creating, more opportunities down the field for his teammates. So that's really the contribution of the newcomers, is that they obviously produced, but it was more than that. They set an example, and they impressed upon the other guys, the returning guys from Clay Helton's 2021 season. You don't have to do everything. You can just do your little part on each play. The touches are going to come. You just need to be a good teammate. It helped create exactly the right culture Lincoln Riley was looking for.
Mm-hmm. So looking ahead to the bowl game, like, how do you think that do you think that USC should still be able to win by about 2 to 3 scores? Like, I know you see it being a high scoring game, but how exactly do you think it's going to go? Do you think Tulane will stay in it in the first half, and then the Trojans will maybe get a stop coming out of the half and then pull away? Or how do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, so I don't think USC is going to pull away. I think USC will get like a modest cushion. But like, if you've watched this USC team, how it normally works is USC gets like a 14, 17 point lead.
Mm-hmm.
And then because USC is up 2 or 3 scores, the defense relaxes because there isn't a maximum of leverage on that possession when you're leading by 14 points. And so USC lets the team get back into the game. The lead gets down to 6 or 7 points. And then Caleb Williams, gets that one final touchdown for some breathing room. And the other team then gets one more touchdown to keep it close. Yeah. Like the Cal and Arizona games, I think, are pretty representative of how this game's going to go. Like USC might build a cushion, but then it's going to come right back down to 1 score. And so it's probably going to be in like that 7 to 11 point range, where, USC is not really fully comfortable until, the triple zeros are on the scoreboard. But like with Caleb Williams there, like if anything goes really wrong and if things get really tight in the fourth quarter, it's Caleb Williams against Tulane's defense. And so there's a total expectation that Caleb Williams is going to make that handful of plays, which will make the difference. But I don't think USC blows the doors off Tulane, because Tulane is too well coached. Willie Fritz is such a phenomenal coach. They run really good stuff on offense. Michael Pratt is a smart quarterback. I watched the Tulane UCF AAC championship game. Michael Pratt uses his eyes to look off the safety, look off the linebacker. He's going to catch USC out of position a few times. And Tyjae Spears is going to break a lot of USC tackles. Like, this is not something USC is going to fix in a few weeks. Like, this is a much longer term fix that USC is involved in. So Tulane's going to score. Tulane's going to score at least 35. But we've seen, USC consistently score more than 40 points this season. And I don't think Tulane has the pass rush that's going to be able to really overpower USC's offensive line and take advantage of USC's limitations on the offensive line. So I would say something like 49-39, 52-42, something in that realm. It could be 7 points instead of 10. Really, it's just something in that range of like 6 to 11 points, where USC wins with a small cushion, but does not, land any kill shots early in the game.
So how do you think defensive line coach Sean Nua has improved this defense? He was obviously a Broyles Award finalist, so he really has made a difference, hasn't he?
Yeah, so I mean, like Tui Pelotu, he's the stud. He was the big dog in the room. But over the course of the season, and of course, you didn't have a lot of depth on this defensive line, but you had to have guys make plays at some point. So Tyrone Taleni, he created a fumble against Dorian Thompson-Robinson in the UCLA game. Like, that was a big defensive play. Solomon Byrd made some big stops in short yardage situations along the defensive line. So like in the win over Washington State, USC shut out Washington State in the second half of that game. That was in week 6 on October 8th. Solomon Byrd played really well in that game, and he had a few other high impact games. Obviously, the Oregon State game was the masterpiece in which a lot of different guys showed up and made plays along the defensive line. So it's really that accumulation of efforts from Solomon Byrd, Tyrone Tulane, Nick Figueroa, other less heralded players who, weren't beasts, they weren't dominant forces over the course of the year, but they gave Tuli Tuipulotu enough help in enough big moments to enable USC to win 11 games. And if those moments don't occur, Sean Nua doesn't get the Broyles recognition that he deserves. So, like Sean Nua, like Alex Grinch, like he was handed a less than ideal set of circumstances, and he was handed, a very meager set of resources, all things considered, and he did what he could with them. Like he did develop players, like guys weren't, transcending preseason expectations by a large margin, but they did get marginally better. And really, in the end, that's what they were reasonably expected to do. Like no one was expecting something spectacular from this defensive front, but Sean Nua definitely made it better over the course of 12, 13 games.
So Miller is the backup quarterback in case
Miller Moss.
Mm-hmm.
Miller Moss?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how much of a factor will he be if Caleb Williams, somehow gets hurt again in the Cotton Bowl or isn't able to play?
So, we have not seen a whole lot of Miller Moss, and this is where the lack of a defense comes into play, right? Because if USC had an excellent defense, it would be putting games away late second, early third quarter. You can then play Miller Moss, for 15, 20 minutes a game. That scenario just did not unfold very often. The one time it did, or the two times it did, the week one against Rice, that was a 66-14 game. So Miller Moss got the fourth quarter there. And then against Colorado, everyone's favorite whipping boy in the Pac-12, before Deion Sanders. Like that's no longer going to be the case, but it certainly was this year. Colorado looked like a junior varsity team, going up against these college teams. So Miller Moss was able to play the fourth quarter against Colorado. That was the week before the UCLA game. That was in mid-November. And for the most part, like he was just dumping the ball off. He was checking down. He was throwing screen passes. Like he wasn't aggressively pushing the ball down the field. So we really haven't seen Miller Moss do too much within this offense. Now, of course, with 4 weeks of bowl preparation, one wonders how much Lincoln Riley has put on his plate in terms of saying, hey, you need to take on more of the playbook. We also have to realize that with Malachi Nelson coming in with the new recruiting class, I would have to think that Miller Moss is going to hit the transfer portal. He needs a place to play, and frankly, he deserves a place to play. Like, he needs to get his snaps, needs to get his reps at another school. So, like, if he does get a chance to play in the event of a Caleb Williams injury, he's definitely going to be motivated. He'll have had time to do more prep within Lincoln Riley's offense for the bowl game, but he really hasn't been asked to do a whole lot. And so, like, if Miller Moss has to play at least a half, anything more than like one or two drives to win this game, I don't think he's ready. I don't think he's going to be up to the challenge of carrying this USC offense against, against the backdrop of a USC defense that's probably going to give up a fair share of points. I don't think Miller Moss is ready to win this game if he has to play for an extended period of time, but it would certainly be an opportunity that he would find welcome, and it might give himself the very bounce or splash in the transfer portal that he might need to have another program, another head coach snap him up in the portal and entrust the offense to him at that new school in 2023. I think it's very likely that he's going to enter the portal at some point in the winter or the spring.
Well, if he is able to play in the Cotton Bowl because of the Caleb Williams injury, 2023 Cotton Bowl is a great audition for Mr. Moss.
It certainly would be.
It could be kind of like, Clint Longley in the 1974 Cowboys-Redskins game on Thanksgiving. So
that was an all-time classic.
Oh, man, you're digging into me, Jackson. Okay.
But
So,
what's your prediction for the Cotton Bowl?
Mhm.
I'm going to say USC 49, Tulane 42. I think it's going to be like a 7 to 10 point game, and Tulane's going to score plenty, but USC is going to score a little more. That's basically how it's been for USC pretty much since the Utah game in mid-October.
So looking ahead to 2023, obviously the expectation is to make the playoffs, right?
No doubt.
Yeah.
Like you came close in year one. You weren't expected to get there in year one. You're definitely expected to get there in year two. No doubt about it.
So the schedule has a bit of a step up as they have to go to Autzen one last time with Bo Nix. And then Michael Penix returning to Washington. That will be in the Coliseum. And then Utah again in the Coliseum. So do you think that if the defense takes a step up, they definitely will be able to make the playoff?
I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? It's just about giving yourself a little bit more margin for error so that the offense is not in a position where, oh, we have to hold serve. If we don't score a touchdown, we're really behind schedule in terms of this game. We're fighting uphill. That is really the whole thing. And Utah was able to hang 43 and 47 points against USC's defense. So you're thinking, if you're USC, gosh, if we can just keep Utah to 30 points next season, like Caleb Williams in his third year overall, his second year at USC, like we should be able to win if we hold Utah to 30 points. Now, of course, one thing we're still waiting for at Utah is, will Cam Rising return for another season? Now, my sense is that he will. Like, I think that Cam Rising is invested in Utah football, and I don't think he has the NFL upside that will make him think, oh, I have to get my NFL paycheck right now. I think he's going to be willing to ride it out for another year with the Utes and go for that playoff, go for the national championship that the Utes didn't get this season. But that's just speculation. Even if Cam Rising does come back, USC having Caleb Williams for another season, that offense is just going to be extremely good. And the defense does not have to be spectacular, but it does need to be so much better than it was this year. And of course, USC's two worst tackling games of 2022, they were against Utah. So there is not a lot of mystery here that USC has to tackle better, but more broadly, like what Utah showed is that USC is not tough enough yet to be a college football playoff team. And so it's finding that toughness, especially on defense, that really, marks you as really being ready for the bright lights, really being ready for the big time. It would have been fascinating to see USC play against Michigan or Georgia in the playoff, because that would have been a real physical challenge. It would have been a physical uphill battle for the Trojans. So they're not going to get that test, but it's still pretty apparent that Utah did more than enough to show that USC still has to make a significant jump in terms of toughness. And if Alex Grinch cannot deliver that, then USC needs to be looking at a new defensive coordinator when it goes to the Big Ten in 2024.
So, starting in 2024, of course, USC is going to go into the Big Ten. I mean, how funny is it going to be that USC and Maryland are going to be conference opponents? How funny is that? And
it's interesting that you mentioned Maryland, because Caleb Williams is from the DMV and Jordan Addison is from the DMV. And you're going to see Lincoln Riley recruit that area pretty heavily. And that is how USC is going to, at least that is the plan for how USC is going to thrive in the Big Ten, is that you not only recruit more nationally, but you can recruit in some of these new Big Ten markets that you're going to be a part of. You're going to play a game at Rutgers. Well, you're going to recruit New Jersey. You're going to play a game at Maryland. You're going to recruit the DMV. You're going to be playing in these other locations. That's going to pry open new opportunities for USC to recruit in those areas. And you're going to say, hey, we can play Big Ten football out here in sunny Southern California. It's going to be very attractive. No, you don't have to play Big Ten football in a cold Midwestern or Mid-Atlantic city. You can come out here and play Big Ten football. So, USC should not be terrifically worried about how it's going to sink or swim in the Big Ten, especially when you look at the condition of the Big Ten. Like this was a 2-team conference this year. This was Michigan and Ohio State and the 12 dwarfs. Penn State lost the 2 games that mattered to the Nittany Lions, and that was the 3rd best team in the Big Ten. And Penn State got solidly outclassed by Michigan. Played Ohio State well for 3 quarters, but then got dominated in the 4th quarter. So if you're USC, you're thinking, hey, we can hang with these big boys. I mean, especially if Ryan Day. The hot rumor, like the subterranean rumor mill, is that he wants an NFL job and that he doesn't want to stay at Ohio State for the long term. So like if he leaves, if he loses to Harbaugh a 3rd straight time in 23, he might leave because he's pushed out, not because he wants to go to the NFL. It could be a situation where he is, encouraged to explore other opportunities. That could be how he leaves Ohio State after 2023 if he doesn't beat Harbaugh next year. And that game is going to be in Ann Arbor. So you can imagine a scenario in which Ohio State really loses its footing, loses its position as this top-tier national program. And if that's the case, well, USC can really ascend right to the top spot in the Big Ten. It can be right there on the same plane with Jim Harbaugh at Michigan. So, now Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, that could be a problem for USC. That could be the roadblock. That could be the obstacle that prevents USC from immediately attaining top tier status in the Big Ten. But frankly, I think USC has so many recruiting advantages. There are going to be so many attractive components of, being in the Big Ten, but still playing in Los Angeles. I think there are going to be ways that USC can set itself apart and Lincoln Riley can formulate a national recruiting and portal strategy that will enable USC to be at the top of the Big Ten right from the get-go.
Oh, that's going to be very fun. So, the USC Notre Dame rivalry, when it's at Notre Dame, it's on NBC, of course. But starting next year, the Big Ten has a $1 billion a year contract for the next 7 years with Fox, CBS, NBC. And 2024 is usually where USC plays Notre Dame on rivalry week. So I asked this question. Will USC Notre Dame be a yearly nighttime matchup on NBC? And if NBC's smart, they should do it. But what do you think, Mr. Zemek?
Really good question, because if you're Fox, you can't really put that game as big noon Saturday when it's out in the Los Angeles Coliseum. They're going to pass. They're going to pass it around. I think. I don't think NBC is going to get exclusive rights to that window just because Fox is going to want in on the action. I do think that every other year, or maybe in a rotation, also with CBS. I know that CBS is 3rd and that NBC is 2nd and Fox is 1st. I think they're going to find ways for Fox to show that game as a mid-afternoon game some of the time. Not necessarily most of the time, but some of the time. I don't think, and precisely because NBC gets USC Notre Dame when it's in South Bend, I think in those off years, you're going to see Fox get in a little bit. And also, I'm sure you're aware that the Big Ten championship game deal, CBS is going to get a turn. NBC is going to get a turn, as well as Fox. So the pie is going to be split. I think that's a pretty clear point of emphasis within the Big Ten TV deal. Even though we don't have the exact specifics, I think we can pretty safely say that NBC is not going to have a lock on the USC Notre Dame game in particular. Now, I will say in terms of NBC, because USC is on the West Coast, and because NBC's part of the Big Ten package is for a primetime game, NBC is going to get most USC home games. That NBC is going to be the majority broadcaster, but it won't be exclusive. And that's why you're going to make sure, if you're the Big Ten, that Fox in particular is getting its share of USC games along with NBC. And then, of course, CBS will get CBS is going to get those USC Maryland, USC Rutgers games in that number 3 Big Ten game in the mid-afternoon. But you're going to see Fox get its share of USC home games, including against Notre Dame.
Well, we know Fox is going to be airing Michigan, Ohio State every year, so it's I wonder where
and
USC.
then USC Notre Dame right after it.
Mhm.
But that's
At,
gonna
le-
be
at least every other cycle, like not
Mhm.
every cycle, but every other cycle or every third cycle.
Do you think
Well-
that bringing in Lincoln Riley helped boost the Pac-12 into getting these coaches such as Kalen DeBoer, Dan Lanning, Kenny Dillingham now? Do you think that boosted the Pac-12? He's like, hey, everyone's got to compete with USC. It just can't be a one-team league.
Well, I think to a slight extent it's true, but let's remember that Washington and Oregon changed their coaches pretty much when USC did.
Mhm.
Like, so it's not as though there was a year or 2 year gap where USC did well and then your Oregon and Washington 1 or 2 years later saying, "Oh, well, we saw what Lincoln Riley did at USC." No, like that there wasn't really a chance to do that. I do think in the immediate moment it was, oh, USC just hired Lincoln Riley a few weeks ago, like we better make sure to do it right. I think like that's the influence that Lincoln Riley had on those hires. But I think that with Oregon and Washington, the hires that they made, I think they just learned from previous situations. They learned from in terms of what we need just to be really good right now. Especially with Washington, because Washington was a disaster because Jimmy Lake hired John Donovan as his offensive coordinator, one of the worst coordinator hires in recent memory. So Washington's athletic department realized, oh, yeah, we need someone who knows what he's doing on offense. And Kalen DeBoer was a home run, very clearly. So, like, I think Lincoln Riley had like a slight, moderate, peripheral kind of influence in the moment, like, oh, USC did the thing, so we better hire someone good. Sure, that did matter to an extent, but it was more a matter of Washington in particular addressing a very acute weakness and making sure, oh, let's not go down this path again. That was the more central reason. But to say that Lincoln Riley had nothing to do with it, no, he had something to do with it, but he just wasn't the main reason.
Mm-hmm. So, Matt, we're gonna go shout you out here on Trojans Wire. Jackson, if you want to answer any more questions, we're gonna say.
For those who want to talk about USC with you, Mr. Zemek, tell them where they can find you, man.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm on the Monday show with Mark Rogers at the Voice of College Football. That's 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific. Not sure if we're going to do a post Cotton Bowl Monday night show, but there is a USC post game show. Comes on right after the Cotton Bowl's over, so that's going to be like 4:30 Eastern, 1:30 Pacific on Monday, and that's hosted by Tony Altomore, Tim Prangley, Rick Anaya. I know that Will is a panelist.
Yeah, I like to come on. I like
that
to come
USC
on.
post game show, so he might be dropping in for that show on Monday afternoon, right after the Cotton Bowl is over. So you can definitely find me there. And but I'm just I'm around on Twitter, and of course I'll be tweeting from the Trojans Wire Twitter account during the game, one last rodeo. But really, the main place is on the Monday show with Mark Rogers at the Voice of College Football, and of course, one last USC post-game show at the Voice of College Football right after the Cotton Bowl. So those are the places you really want to look at on a weekly basis.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Matt, and subscribe to Young Guns. Subscribe to Voice of College Football USC.
Thanks for having me on your show, guys.
Yeah, of course.
Coming on.